When I got married, I stayed quiet about the $50 million company I inherited from my grandfather. What happens when the person you vow to spend your life with only sees you for the fortune you represent? I carried a secret into my marriage, a truth so heavy it threatened to sink our vows before we even said, I do. This is a story about love, deception, and the staggering cost of finding out who someone really is when they think you're worth nothing. If you believe in stories that reveal the deepest truths of the human heart, then subscribe to this channel. My name is Eleanor, and at 72 years old, I have lived a life filled with more twists of fate than most. This story, one of the most pivotal chapters of my life, is one I've kept locked away for decades. It begins not with a grand revelation, but with a deliberate, trembling silence. The silk of my wedding gown whispered against my skin as I stood before the full-length mirror, a sound that seemed to echo the secret screaming in my own heart. It was a perfect dress, all ivory lace and delicate pearls, chosen by my mother-in-law, Brenda, with a scrutinizing eye for pedigree and price. The Ravenscrofts only wear the best, Eleanor, she'd said, her tone leaving no room for argument. On that crisp autumn morning, sunlight streaming into the bridal suite, the weight of what I was about to do pressed down on me, a physical force as tangible as the silk I wore. My matron of honor, Sarah, fussed with my veil. You look stunning, Ellie, absolutely radiant. But her eyes, the eyes of my oldest and dearest friend, held a question she was too polite to voice. She knew me better than anyone, and she could sense the tremor beneath my calm exterior. It's just pre-wedding jitters, I lied, forcing a smile that felt brittle. Everyone gets them. It's more than that, she murmured, her voice low. You've been distant for months, ever since your grandfather passed. The mention of Arthur, my grandfather, was a lance to my heart. He had been my rock, my confidant, the man who raised me after my own parents were lost in a fog of their own ambitions and endless travel. His death, 8 months prior, had left a chasm in my world that this wedding, for all its pomp, could not hope to fill. And it was his final, earth-shattering bequest that was the source of the secret I carried. I miss him, that's all. I just wished he were here to walk me down the aisle. Sarah squeezed my hand. He's here, Ellie, in you. But he was there in more than just spirit. He was there in the form of a controlling interest in Vanderlinde Industries, a global manufacturing conglomerate valued at just over $50 million. An inheritance my husband-to-be, Charles Ravenscroft, and his entire family knew nothing about. The decision to keep it quiet had been born in the raw grief of the reading of the will. My grandfather's lawyer, a stern man named Mr. Albright, with eyes that had seen every flavor of familial greed, had explained it to me in his oak-paneled office. The company is yours, Eleanor. The shares, the voting rights, the entire legacy. Arthur was very specific. He wanted it in your hands alone. I had been stunned to speak. I knew my grandfather was successful, a self-made man who had built his company from a single tool and die shop. But $50 million? It was an abstract number, a fantasy, until it wasn't. There is, however, a condition, a rather unorthodox one. Arthur stipulated that you are not to publicly disclose your ownership or the full extent of your controlling stake for a period of 1 year following the transfer of assets. He wanted you to have time to understand the business, to find your footing without undue influence. Undue influence. The words hung in the air. He meant gold diggers. He meant people like the Ravenscrofts. Charles's family was old money, a lineage built on inherited wealth and a quiet, desperate terror of losing their social standing. Their fortune, once substantial, had been slowly eroded by bad investments and a refusal to adapt to a changing world. They were a beautiful, gilded facade hiding dry rot. Charles, with his charming smile and his job at a prestigious but ultimately inconsequential nonprofit, was their hope for a fresh infusion of capital through a good marriage. They believed I was that infusion, a well-bred, modestly funded girl from a respectable, if somewhat obscure family. They thought my grandfather was a simple, successful small business owner. They had no idea I was the sole heir to an empire. And so I made a choice my grandfather, in his infinite wisdom, had perhaps foreseen. I would tell no one, not Charles, not his parents, not a soul. I would marry him as plain Eleanor Wiley, a woman of modest, comfortable means. I needed to know, with a certainty that chilled me to my very soul, if Charles loved me for who I was, or for what he believed I could be for his family. The ceremony was a blur of stained glass and solemn vows. I looked into Charles's handsome, eager face as I promised to love him for richer, for poorer, the irony a bitter taste on my tongue. His grip on my hands was firm, possessive. He was marrying the woman he thought I was, and I was marrying a man I desperately hoped was worthy of the woman I truly was. The reception was held at the Ravenscroft estate, a sprawling, manicured property that spoke of generations of wealth. It was there, amidst the clinking champagne flutes and the string quartet, that the first cracks began to show. I was standing with Sarah, trying to absorb the surreal spectacle, when Charles's father, Lawrence Ravenscroft, approached me. He was a tall, patrician man with a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. "Eleanor, my dear," he said, kissing me on both cheeks. "A beautiful ceremony, truly. Welcome to the family." He clapped a heavy hand on Charles's shoulder. "We're all so thrilled Charles has finally settled down with such a sensible girl." The condescension was as thick as the imported caviar being passed on silver trays. "Thank you, Lawrence," I said, my voice steady despite the flutter in my chest. "Your grandfather would have been proud," he continued, swirling the brandy in his glass. "A shame he couldn't be here. A real self-made man, from what I understand. Built a nice little business, didn't he? Machine parts, was it?" "Industrial components," I corrected gently. "Yes, he was very proud of it." "I'm sure he was," Lawrence said, his gaze sweeping over the opulent tent, the glittering guests. "It's good you have that, a small, stable inheritance, something to fall back on. It allows Charles to pursue his passions at the foundation without the vulgar pressure of keeping a roof over your heads." The insult wrapped in the guise of benevolence was masterful. My grandfather's life's work, his legacy, was a nice little business, a trifle, something to be mildly grateful for. Charles, beaming, seemed oblivious. "Dad's right, Ellie. It takes the pressure off. We can build a life based on what we love, not just on money." I looked from my husband's naive, privileged face to his father's smug, dismissive one and felt the secret inside me harden into a shield. They had no idea. They were so sure of their place in the world, so sure of their assessment of mine. Later that night, in the lavish honeymoon suite of a hotel they had undoubtedly chosen for its name and not its soul, Charles poured us 2 glasses of champagne. He was giddy, triumphant. "We did it, Ellie. The perfect wedding. My parents are finally happy. My mother said you conducted yourself flawlessly. I'm glad I met their expectations. Of course you did. Of this start of everything, Dad was talking to me tonight. He thinks with you by my side, with your stability, I could be in line for a directorship at the family's holding company in a few years. It's a real opportunity." My blood ran cold. It had begun so quickly. The plans, the assumptions, the absorption of my supposed stability into the Ravenscroft machine. "Charles," I said carefully, setting my untouched champagne on a bedside table, "is that what you want? A directorship? I thought you loved your work at the foundation." He turned, his expression of mild confusion. "Well, of course I do, but that's a young man's game, Ellie. This is about legacy, about our future." He came over and took my hands. "This is about building something real for our family. With your inheritance and my family's name, we can secure our position. For our children." Our children. The word should have been a balm, a promise of a future. Instead, they felt like a threat. He was already counting my grandfather's money, the money he knew nothing about, and weaving it into the Ravenscroft family tapestry of faded glory. I forced another smile, the mask I would have to wear every day for the next year feeling heavier than lead. "Our future," I repeated, the words tasting like ash. He kissed me then, and I closed my eyes, trying to lose myself in the moment, in the man I loved,
but all I could see was the ghost of my grandfather and the towering, silent fortress of the company I now owned, a fortress whose walls were built on a lie I had to protect at all costs. The first day of my marriage was over, and the great, terrible performance of my life had just begun. And I knew with a dread that seeped into my very bones that the curtain would eventually fall, and when it did, the aftermath would shatter everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty. The question was, what would be left standing in the ruins?
The first year of my marriage was a masterclass in living a double life. By day, I was Eleanor Ravenscroft, the dutiful, modestly bred wife, learning the intricate social choreography of my new family. I attended charity luncheons and presided over committee meetings for the preservation of historical gardens, my smile a carefully crafted mask. My mother-in-law, Brenda, was my relentless tutor, her hand a firm, correcting pressure on the small of my back. Posture, Eleanor. A Ravenscroft does not slouch. By night, after Charles had fallen asleep, I would retreat to the walk-in closet of our sprawling, tastefully beige suburban home. There, tucked behind a row of my sensible, Brenda-approved sweater sets, was a locked briefcase. Inside were the weekly reports from Mr. Albright, spreadsheets, profit and loss statements, executive summaries on acquisitions and R&D. Vanderland Industries was not a nice little business. It was a vibrant, growing beast, and I was its silent master. I learned to read a balance sheet by the dim glow of a closet light bulb, the guilt's a gnawing companion, overshadowed by a fierce, protective pride. The Ravenscrofts would have devoured my grandfather's legacy, stripped it for parts to maintain their gilded decay. The tension came to a head on our first anniversary. Charles had planned a dinner at the most exclusive restaurant in the city, his eyes sparkling with a secret of his own. "I have news, Ellie," he said, leaning across the table. "The directorship. It's mine. They're announcing it next week." The air left my lungs. "Charles, that's wonderful," I managed, the words automatic. "It's because of you," he said, his grip tightening on my hand. "Your steadiness, your financial prudence. Father said having a wife with her own secure, uncomplicated assets makes me a less risky prospect." He laughed, a bright, happy sound that felt like a shard of glass in my heart. "An investment." The word landed like a physical blow. "Don't be so shocked, darling," he chuckled, misreading my expression. "It's a compliment. They see us as a team, a solid, dependable unit." He signaled the waiter for another bottle of champagne. "And I have something for you." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside were a pair of stunning diamond teardrop earrings, beautiful and extravagantly expensive. A fortune his family believed was being indirectly subsidized by my grandfather's small, stable company. "Charles," I breathed, my throat tight. "They're too much. Perhaps we should return them. We should be thinking about saving." His face darkened. "Return them? Don't be ridiculous, Eleanor. This is who we are. We can't have you looking like some pauper at the induction gala." "I'd rather look like a pauper who lives within her means than a princess living on a lie." The words were out before I could stop them, sharp and loaded. He stared at me, confusion turning to irritation. "What is that supposed to mean? What lie? Is this about your grandfather's money? For God's sake, Ellie, it's not like it's a fortune. It's a comfort. But we are Ravenscrofts. We have an image to uphold." The contention in his voice, the casual dismissal of the legacy I was guarding with my very soul, broke something in me. "You have no idea what you're talking about," I said, my voice low and shaking. "You and your family, you look at me and you see a number, a small, safe, convenient number. You don't see me at all." I turned and fled to the bathroom, locking the door behind me as sobs racked my body. I heard him on the other side, his fist pounding softly on the wood. "Eleanor, this is insane. Open the door."
What has gotten into you? Is it your time of the month? This isn't like you." His words only made me cry harder. He didn't know what I was like. He knew the carefully constructed facade. He didn't know the woman who could command a boardroom, the woman who was, at that very moment, the majority shareholder of a company that could buy and sell his family's empire 10 times over. We made a tense, cold peace by morning. He attributed my outburst to stress and female nerves. I let him believe that. It was easier than the truth. But the landscape of our marriage had shifted irrevocably. The secret was no longer just a shield. It had become a weapon, and I had almost unsheathed it. I had seen the flicker of contempt in his eyes when he thought I was being irrational, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the love he professed was conditional. It was conditional on me playing my part, on me being the modest, uncomplicated asset he believed me to be. The clock was now ticking down, not just to the end of my grandfather's one-year stipulation, but to a confrontation that would tear my carefully constructed world apart.
The cold peace that settled over our home after the anniversary fight was more suffocating than any outright argument. Charles moved through the house with a wounded, bewildered air, treating me with the cautious politeness one might reserve for a volatile stranger. I played my part, the chastened wife, all the while the wires of my secret life humming with ever greater voltage. The briefcase in the closet was no longer just a repository of reports, it was a command center. Mr. Albright had begun sending dossiers on the key executives at Vanderland, men and women who had no idea their true boss was a young woman studying their personnel files in her nightgown. The Ravenscroft world, however, was closing in. The directorship was now official, and with it came a relentless calendar of social obligations, each one a fresh theater for my performance. The most daunting was the annual Ravenscroft Foundation Gala, the family's premier event for showcasing their philanthropy and, more importantly, their enduring relevance. Brenda took personal charge of my preparation, her scrutiny intensifying now that I was officially a director's wife. "We'll need a new gown for you, Eleanor," she declared one afternoon in my sun-drenched living room, her tone leaving no room for discussion. "Something from the spring collection. Not too bold, but with undeniable quality. The press will be there, and they have a nose for these things." "I have a dress, Brenda," I said quietly, thinking of a beautiful, understated navy sheath my grandfather had bought me for my last birthday with him. It was simple, but the fabric was exquisite. She waved a dismissive hand. "That old thing. No, dear, this is different. We'll go to the salon tomorrow. My treat." The phrase, "my treat," was a lie we both understood. It was an investment, just as I was. The following day, I found myself in a plush, intimidating boutique, surrounded by mirrors and women with tape measures around their necks. Brenda presided over the affair like a general, rejecting gown after gown. Too youthful, too matronly. The cut is all wrong for her frame. I stood on a pedestal, feeling like a prize heifer being judged, the silks and satins feeling like cheap burlap against my skin. It was in the middle of this humiliation that my phone, tucked into my purse on a nearby chaise, vibrated with a specific, coded rhythm I'd set for Mr. Albright. It was a signal he used only for urgent matters. "Brenda, would you excuse me for a moment? I need to take this. It's the florist for the gala centerpieces. They've been terribly confused." She sighed, exasperated. "Well, be quick about it. We need to make a decision." I slipped into the hushed quiet of a changing room, locking the door behind me. My heart hammered against my ribs as I brought the phone to my ear. "Albright?" "Eleanor." His voice was tense, stripped of his usual professional calm. "There's a situation. A corporate raider, Silas Thorne." The name meant nothing to me, but the way Mr. Albright said it made my blood run cold. "What about him?" "He's been quietly acquiring shares, minor blocks, scattered. We thought it was nothing, just an investor, but my sources tell me he's made a significant purchase this morning.
He's now the largest minority shareholder. He's calling for an emergency board meeting. A board meeting. A meeting I, as the majority shareholder, had the absolute power to call or dismiss. A meeting I could not attend. On what grounds? I whispered, my knuckles white around the phone. He's claiming a lack of strategic direction. He's questioning leadership in my absence. Mr. Albright paused. He's sniffing around the ownership structure, Eleanor. He doesn't know it's you, but he knows something is off. He knows Arthur didn't leave the company to me. Outside the dressing room, I could hear Brenda's sharp tone. Eleanor, are you quite finished? We have the Valentino here, and it is not going to wait all day. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. My two worlds were colliding in this ridiculous, perfumed room. The fate of a $50 million company was hanging in the balance, and my greatest immediate threat was an impatient mother-in-law and a dress I didn't want. Handle it, I hissed into the phone, my voice low and fierce, a tone I'd never used before. Delay it. Use any proxy you have. I don't care what it costs. I cannot be drawn into the open. Not yet. There was a beat of silence on the other end, and I heard a new note of respect in Albright's voice. Understood. I'll manage it.
I ended the call, leaning my forehead against the cool mirror. The woman staring back at me was pale, her eyes wide with a fear that was entirely new. This was no longer a game of secrets and hurt feelings. This was a battle for control, and a predator had just caught the scent of blood in the water. Eleanor? Brenda's voice was a knife through the door. I took a deep, shuddering breath, composing my face into a mask of mild apology. I unlocked the door. So sorry, Brenda. You wouldn't believe the trouble with the peonies. She looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing slightly. You look pale. Are you feeling unwell? It's just the lighting in here, I said, forcing a smile. Now, let's see this Valentino. The gown was beautiful, of course, a cascade of ivory silk that cost more than Charles's first car. As I stood there, letting the attendant zip me up, I felt a strange, grim resolve settle over me. Silas Thorne was a threat from the world I was born to lead. Brenda Ravenscroft was a threat from the world I had married into. Both saw me as an obstacle, an irrelevance, or a pawn. But as I looked at my reflection, the ivory silk feeling like a suit of armor, I understood something fundamental. The quiet, unassuming Eleanor they both thought they knew was a fiction. The real Eleanor was the one who had just given a command to a powerful lawyer, the one who held the controlling interest in a corporate empire, the one who was now, for the first time, truly ready to fight for what was hers. The gala was no longer just a social test. It was a reconnaissance mission. I would smile, I would nod, I would play the perfect director's wife. But behind my eyes, a war room was being assembled, and the general was finally coming out of the shadows. The performance would continue, but the script was about to change in ways none of them could possibly foresee. The morning of the gala dawned with a silent, electric tension in the house. Charles, buoyed by the importance of the evening, had adopted a patronizing cheerfulness that grated on my every nerve. "Big night, Ellie," he said, buttoning his cufflinks at his dresser. "Just remember to smile, stick close to Mother and me, and for God's sake, let me do the talking if any of the senior partners try to engage you in conversation. Some of these financial types can be overly complex." I stood at the window, watching a gardener meticulously trim a hedge into soulless perfection. "I think I can manage a conversation, Charles." He chuckled, coming to stand behind me, his hands on my shoulders. "Of course you can, darling, but it's a different world. All jargon and balance sheets, dreadfully dull. You just focus on looking beautiful. That's your role tonight." He kissed the top of my head, and the condescension in the gesture felt like a brand. My role. The words echoed in my mind as I prepared that evening. The Valentino gown hung from my closet door. a specter of gilded conformity. But as I looked at it, an idea, reckless and defiant, began to take root. Brenda had chosen the dress for the woman she wanted me to be, but I was not that woman. Quietly, I unlocked my briefcase. Nestled between the financial reports was a small, worn jewelry box. Inside was a simple, heavy platinum necklace from which hung a single, unadorned gear machined to a mirror finish. It had been my grandfather's first successful piece, a prototype that launched Vanderlind Industries. He'd given it to me when I turned 16. "This is where it all began, Ellie," he'd said, his rough, oil-stained finger tracing the perfect teeth of the gear. "Never forget the value of what's real, of what you can build with your own two hands." I had never worn it in front of the Ravenscrofts. It was too industrial, too connected to a world they considered vulgar. But tonight, I fastened it around my neck. It lay cold and heavy against my skin, a hidden totem of my true self. Then I put on the Valentino. The ivory silk was my camouflage, but the gear was my truth. The gala was a sea of black ties and glittering gowns, held in the ballroom of a museum the Ravenscrofts had endowed. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead, reflecting in the polished marble floors. I moved through the crowd on Charles's arm, my smile a fixed, practiced curve. I was introduced as Charles's wife, Eleanor, my identity an appendage to his. I was playing my part perfectly until I saw him. Across the room, standing near a massive ice sculpture that was slowly melting into a meaningless puddle, was a man I had only seen in the grainy photograph Mr. Albright had emailed me. Silas Thorne. He was taller than I had imagined, with a lean, predatory grace and sharp, intelligent eyes that scanned the room like he was assessing assets and liabilities. He wasn't a part of the Ravenscroft circle. He was a wolf who had strayed into a flock of pampered sheep. My breath hitched. Charles, feeling my slight stumble, followed my gaze. "Ah, that's Silas Thorne. New money, aggressive. He's been making noise in the manufacturing sector lately. A bit of a corporate shark, from what father says. Best to avoid him." A corporate shark circling my company was standing 50 feet away from me, and my husband's only concern was that he was new money? The irony was so profound it was almost paralyzing. The moment of collision was inevitable. It happened during dinner, as I was making a polite escape from a conversation about the merits of different private schools. I stepped out onto a deserted balcony, gulping in the cool night air, the weight of the gear a comforting anchor against my sternum. "I must say, that's a fascinating piece of jewelry." The voice, smooth and deep, came from behind me. I froze, then slowly turned. Silas Thorne stood in the doorway, a single glass of whiskey in his hand, his gaze fixed not on my dress, not on my face, but on the gear resting at my throat. "Thank you," I said, my voice thankfully steady. "It's not the usual fare for these events. No diamonds, no colored stones, pure function, elevated to art." He stepped closer, his eyes analytical. "That's precision machining. Exceptional quality. Not a piece you find in a boutique." My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. It was my grandfather's. He took another sip of his whiskey, his gaze never leaving mine. He was testing, probing. "A man of industry, then." "You could say that." He moved to the balcony railing, standing beside me, but not looking at me, instead gazing out at the glittering city skyline. "It's an interesting world, industry. So much of it is about perception, what people see on the surface." He gestured vaguely towards the ballroom. "All of this, for instance, it's a beautiful facade, but it's the things nobody sees, the quiet, powerful engines humming away in the background,
that truly control the machine. His words were a double-edged sword, each one feeling dangerously specific. Was he talking about the Ravenscrofts, or was he talking about me? Sometimes, I replied, choosing my words with the care of a bomb disposal expert. The most powerful part of a machine is the one that goes unnoticed, the one everyone underestimates. A slow, genuine smile touched his lips, a stark contrast to the predatory sharpness of his features. Precisely. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Ravenscroft. You are full of surprises. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and melted back into the crowd, leaving me standing alone, my hands trembling slightly against the cold stone of the balcony. The encounter had lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt like a seismic event. He hadn't just seen the necklace, he had recognized its language. He had looked past the Valentino and seen the gear. When I re-entered the ballroom, Charles was immediately at my side, his face tight with annoyance. "Where have you been? Mother has been looking for you. The Hendersons wanted to say goodbye. And what on earth is that? It looks like something from a hardware store. Take it off, Eleanor. It's embarrassing." In that moment, looking at his petulant, entitled face, any lingering doubt I had evaporated. The secret was no longer a burden. It was my liberation. I met his gaze squarely, my hand coming up to touch the cool, solid metal of the gear. "No, Charles," I said, my voice quiet but clear, carrying a finality that made his eyes widen in shock. "This stays on." I didn't wait for his response. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, the first crack in his perfect world widening into a chasm. The war was no longer a silent, internal one. The first shot had been fired, and it was a simple, unadorned piece of platinum. And I knew with a terrifying and exhilarating certainty that Silas Thorne had not missed its significance. The hunter had just caught the scent of his quarry, and the quarry, for the first time, was ready to stop running.
The drive home from the gala was a glacial silence. Charles sat rigidly in the driver's seat, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, the air in the car so thick with his fury I could barely breathe. He didn't speak until the garage door had closed behind us, sealing us in a tomb of concrete and unspoken rage. "Would you care to explain yourself?" His voice was dangerously low, each word clipped. "What was that little performance tonight? First you disappear, then I find you lurking on a balcony, and you refuse a simple, reasonable request about that trinket." He spat the last word as if it were poison. I walked into the house, my heels clicking on the polished floor, the gear still a comforting, defiant weight against my skin. "It wasn't a performance, Charles, and it's not a trinket. It was my grandfather's." "I don't care if it was the crown jewels," he exploded, his control finally shattering. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight enough to bruise, and spun me around to face him. His face was a mask of bewildered anger. "You embarrassed me, in front of my parents, in front of the entire board. You deliberately defied me. Who do you think you are?" The pain in my arm was sharp, a concrete manifestation of the deeper, more insidious pain of the last year. I wrenched my arm free, my own temper, so long suppressed, rising to meet his. "Who am I? I'm your wife, Charles. Or am I just another accessory, one that's supposed to be seen and not heard? To wear what I'm told and say what I'm told? This is about that damned inheritance again, isn't it?" He sneered, his eyes blazing with contempt. "That little nest egg has given you ideas above your station. Let me be perfectly clear, Eleanor. That money is a cushion. It is not a throne. You are a Ravenscroft now. You will act like one." The word station echoed in the lavish foyer, confirming every ugly suspicion I had harbored. He truly saw me as someone he had elevated, a project he had taken on. "It's not about the money," I said, my voice trembling not with fear, but with a long-suppressed power. "It's about respect. It's about you seeing me as an equal." "An equal?"
He let out a short, harsh laugh. Don't be absurd. We are partners, but we have different roles. My role is to lead, to provide the name and the position. Your role is to support that, to bolster it, not to undermine it by wearing industrial scrap metal to a black tie event and consorting with men like Silas Thorne. So that was the real nerve I had touched. It wasn't just the defiance, it was the perceived association with a rival. My conversation with Mr. Thorne was brief and impersonal. Stay away from him, Eleanor. He's a predator. He's not one of us. He doesn't belong in our world. A bitter smile touched my lips. And what world is that, Charles? A world of fading names and desperate appearances? A world where you have to marry for stability because your own fortune isn't enough? The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. His open hand connected with my cheek, a sharp, stinging crack that snapped my head to the side. The shock was absolute, a cold void that swallowed the pain. I stood there, my hand rising slowly to my burning skin, staring at him. The man I had married was gone, replaced by this stranger, this entitled boy whose only response to being challenged was violence. The rage in his eyes flickered and died, replaced by a flash of panic. He looked at his own hand as if it belonged to someone else. Eleanor, I'm sorry. You pushed me. You know how stressed I've been. I didn't speak. I just looked at him, seeing him with a terrifying, crystalline clarity. The charming facade had crumbled, revealing the weak, frightened core. The love I had fought to protect, the secret I had carried to preserve it, felt like ash in my mouth. Without a word, I turned and walked upstairs, my steps measured and sure. I went not to the master bedroom we shared, but to the guest room. I locked the door behind me, the click of the bolt, a final, definitive sound. I leaned against the door, my body beginning to shake, not from the pain of the slap, but from the seismic finality of it. He had crossed a line from which there was no return. The next morning, I waited until he had left for work. The house was silent, haunted by the ghosts of the previous night's confrontation. I went to the closet, not for the briefcase, but for a suitcase. I was packing when my phone rang. It was Mr. Albright. Eleanor, he began, his voice grim. The board meeting is scheduled for Friday. Thorne is mobilizing. He's presenting a motion to install a new CEO, citing a leadership vacuum. He's gathered significant support. I can't delay it any longer. I looked at the half-filled suitcase on the bed, then at my reflection in the mirror. The faint redness on my cheek was still visible. The time for hiding was over. Don't delay it, Franklin, I said, my voice unnaturally calm. I'll be there. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Eleanor, are you sure? The stipulation, the Ravenscrofts are no longer my concern. Email me the time and location. And Franklin, prepare them. I ended the call. The decision was made. The secret was a bomb, and I was about to pull the pin. I finished packing, my movements swift and efficient. I took only what I had brought into the marriage, leaving behind the Valentino gown, the sweater sets, the life that had never truly been mine. As I zipped the suitcase closed, I felt a profound, terrifying sense of freedom. I was walking away from a gilded cage, and I was walking directly into a corporate war, armed with nothing but the truth and a small platinum gear that held the weight of a legacy. The quiet wife was gone. It was time for the heir to take her throne. The boardroom on Friday would not know what hit it, and neither would the husband who had just made the greatest miscalculation of his life. The real Eleanor was finally stepping into the light, and her shadow would be long endued. The next 48 hours were a study in controlled chaos. I moved into a quiet, discreet hotel suite under the name Eleanor Wiley, the self I had been before the Ravenscroft name tried to subsume me. From there, I worked the phone with a focus I hadn't known since my grandfather was alive. Mr. Albright, now Franklin, became my lifeline and my general. We need a strategy, I said, pacing the plush carpet. Thorne has the momentum. How do we counter it?
Ordinarily, we'd present a strategic vision, Franklin replied, his voice crackling with intensity. But we don't have one. You've been a silent partner. Thorn will eviscerate us on that point. Our only play is raw power. You reveal yourself and vote your shares to shut down his motion. It felt brutish, like using a sledgehammer to solve a delicate negotiation. It was the move of a despot, not a leader. My grandfather hadn't built Vanderlined by crushing dissent. He'd built it by outthinking and out-innovating everyone else. A cold clarity settled over me. I couldn't just be the owner. I had to be the heir. Franklin, get me everything on Thorne's recent acquisitions. Not just the companies, but the rationale. His interviews, his shareholder letters. I want to know how he thinks. While he compiled the dossier, I dealt with the fallout from my departure. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree. First, Charles, a barrage of calls that shifted from angry to pleading to frantic. Then Brenda, her messages clipped and icy, demanding to know what melodramatic nonsense I was pulling. I ignored them all. Their world was a distant echo. The only sound that mattered was the hum of the impending boardroom battle. The dossier on Silas Thorne was revealing. He was a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. He targeted solid but undervalued companies with lackluster leadership, streamlined them, injected aggressive sales strategies, and spun them off for a massive profit. He wasn't a destroyer. He was a ruthless optimizer. His complaint about a leadership vacuum wasn't just a power grab. It was likely accurate. With my grandfather gone and no visible successor, Vanderlined was adrift. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. I sat by the window, the city lights blurring below, and I didn't see balance sheets. I saw my grandfather's hands, rough and capable, sketching a new design on a napkin. I heard his voice. "The numbers matter, Ellie, but they're just the score part. The game is played here." He tapped his temple. "You have to see what others don't." By the time the sun rose, I knew what I had to do. I wouldn't just reveal myself. I would reveal a vision. Friday morning, I dressed not in the power suits of a corporate raider, but in a simple, impeccably tailored navy dress. The only jewelry I wore was the platinum gear. I looked like myself, the real myself. Franklin met me in the lobby of the Vanderlined headquarters, a soaring glass tower that never failed to make my heart swell with pride and loss. His eyes widened slightly at my appearance, but he simply nodded. "They're all here." Thorne looks confident. "Let's go," I said. We entered the boardroom. It was a temple of polished mahogany and cold ambition. A dozen faces turned towards us, seasoned executives and investors, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. And there, at the center of the table, was Silas Thorne. He saw Franklin first, then his gaze shifted to me. His eyes, those sharp, analytical eyes, registered a flicker of surprise, then darted to the gear at my throat. His brow furrowed in a moment of intense calculation. And then, astonishingly, a slow, knowing smile touched his lips. He had connected the dots in an instant. Franklin began to speak. "Mr. Albright, while we always appreciate your counsel, this is a board meeting. I'm not sure who your guest is, but this is a closed session." His eyes never left mine, challenging me. I stepped forward with my voice clear and steady, carrying in the silent, tense room. "My name is Eleanor Wiley. Arthur Wiley was my grandfather." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. One of the older board members, a man named Jeffries, scoffed. "Young lady, this is highly irregular. We're in the middle of a serious—" "You're in the middle of a discussion about the future of my company," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. I walked to the head of the table, the chair that had been my grandfather's, and stood behind it. "I am the majority shareholder of Vanderlined Industries." The silence that followed was absolute, stunned. Jeffries' mouth hung open. Thorne simply watched me, his chin resting on his steepled fingers, his expression unreadable. Thorne found his voice first.
A fascinating revelation, Miss Wiley. Or is it Mrs. Ravenscroft? Your anonymity explains the leadership vacuum. It does not, however, solve it. Do you have any relevant experience beyond inheritance? This was the moment, the sledgehammer or the scalpel. I have a lifetime of experience, I said, meeting his gaze squarely. I grew up at my grandfather's knee. I didn't just learn about profit margins and market share, I learned about the soul of a machine. I learned that Vanderline's strength isn't in dominating old markets, but in creating new ones. I paused, letting my words sink in. Mr. Thorne, your analysis is correct. There has been a lack of direction. Your proposal to install a new CEO to streamline and cut is a solution for a dying company. Vanderline isn't dying, it's sleeping. I turned my attention to the rest of the board, my voice gaining passion. My grandfather's first love was innovation, not consolidation. I've reviewed the R&D pipeline. We have projects there that could redefine our sector. Advanced composites, AI-integrated manufacturing processes, projects that have been stalled because we've been playing it safe. Thorne's strategy is to shrink us into profitability. My strategy is to grow us into legacy. I laid out the core of the plan I had spent the night refining, focusing on two of the most promising but riskiest R&D projects. I spoke not in dry financial terms, but with the conviction of someone who believed in the work, who understood the engineering, who had seen the future in her grandfather's blueprints. When I finished, the room was silent again, but the quality of the silence had changed. The hostility had been replaced by thoughtful contemplation. Thorne was the first to speak. He didn't look defeated. He looked intrigued. An ambitious plan, he conceded, and highly speculative. You're asking us to gamble the company's stability on unproven technology. I'm asking you to invest in the principles this company was founded on. The motion on the floor is to install a new CEO. I propose an alternative. Table that motion for 6 months. Give me that time to get these two projects to a demonstrable prototype stage. Let me prove that Vanderline's future lies in building, not just cutting. I looked at Thorne, a direct challenge. Unless you're afraid of a little competition, Mr. Thorne. A long, tense moment stretched between us. The entire board watched, holding its breath. Thorne's reputation was for swift, decisive action. He had come here for a kill. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. It wasn't the smile of a predator who had lost his prey. It was the smile of a chess master who had just been presented with a truly interesting move. 6 months, he said, his voice a low rumble. I'll vote to table the motion. He looked around the table, his gaze commanding. I think we'd all be curious to see what the heiress can build. The vote was called. It was unanimous. The motion was cabled. As the board members filed out, Thorne lingered. He approached me, his demeanor different now. Not a rival, but a potential peer. A bold play, Miss Wiley. You used my own momentum against me. I came for a coronation and got a postponement. He glanced once more at the gear around my neck. It seems I underestimated the engine. He left then, leaving me alone in the boardroom with Franklin, who was beaming with a pride I hadn't seen since my grandfather's time. I had done it. I had stopped the takeover. I had bought myself time. But as I stood there in the sudden quiet, I knew the real battle was just beginning. I had won the boardroom, but the war for Vanderline's soul and the shattered pieces of my personal life loomed larger than ever. I had stepped out of the shadows, and now everyone could see me. There was no going back.
The cold peace that settled over our home after the anniversary fight was more suffocating than any outright argument. Charles moved through the house with a wounded, bewildered air, treating me with the cautious politeness one might reserve for a volatile stranger. I played my part, the chastened wife, all the while the wires of my secret life humming with ever greater voltage. The briefcase in the closet was no longer just a repository of reports. It was a command center. Mr. Albright had begun sending dossiers on the key executives at Vanderland, men and women who had no idea their true boss was a young woman studying their personnel files in her nightgown. The Ravenscroft world, however, was closing in. The directorship was now official, and with it came a relentless calendar of social obligations, each one a fresh theater for my performance. The most daunting was the annual Ravenscroft Foundation Gala, the family's premier event for showcasing their philanthropy and, more importantly, their enduring relevance. Brenda took personal charge of my preparation, her scrutiny intensifying now that I was officially a director's wife. "We'll need a new gown for you, Eleanor," she declared one afternoon in my sun-drenched living room, her tone leaving no room for discussion. "Something from the spring collection. Not too bold, but with undeniable quality. The press will be there, and they have a nose for these things." "I have a dress, Brenda," I said quietly, thinking of a beautiful, understated navy sheath my grandfather had bought me for my last birthday with him. It was simple, but the fabric was exquisite. She waved a dismissive hand. "That old thing? No, dear, this is different. We'll go to the salon tomorrow. My treat." The phrase, "my treat," was a lie we both understood. It was an investment, just as I was. The following day, I found myself in a plush, intimidating boutique surrounded by mirrors and women with tape measures around their necks. Brenda presided over the affair like a general, rejecting gown after gown. Too youthful, too matronly, the cut is all wrong for her. I stood on a pedestal, feeling like a prize heifer being judged, the silks and satins feeling like cheap burlap against my skin. It was in the middle of this humiliation that my phone, tucked into my purse on a nearby chaise, vibrated with a specific coded rhythm I'd set for Mr. Albright. It was a signal he used only for urgent matters. "Brenda, would you excuse me for a moment? I need to take this. It's the florist for the gala's centerpieces. They've been terribly confused." She sighed, exasperated. "Well, be quick about it. We need to make a decision." I slipped into the hushed quiet of a changing room, locking the door behind me. My heart hammered against my ribs as I brought the phone to my ear. "Albright?" "Eleanor." His voice was tense, stripped of his usual professional calm. "There's a situation, a corporate raider, Silas Thorne." The name meant nothing to me, but the way Mr. Albright said it made my blood run cold. "What about him?" "He's been quietly acquiring shares, minor blocks, scattered. We thought it was nothing, just an investor, but my sources tell me he's made a significant purchase this morning. He's now the largest minority shareholder. He's calling for an emergency board meeting." A board meeting. A meeting I, as the majority shareholder, had the absolute power to call or dismiss. A meeting I could not attend. "On what grounds?" I whispered, my knuckles white around the phone. "He's claiming a lack of strategic direction. He's questioning leadership in my absence." Mr. Albright paused. "He's sniffing around the ownership structure, Eleanor. He doesn't know it's you, but he knows something is off. He knows Arthur didn't leave the company to me." Outside the dressing room, I could hear Brenda's sharp tone. "Eleanor, are you quite finished? We have the Valentino here, and it is not going to wait all day." Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. My two worlds were colliding in this ridiculous, perfumed room. The fate of a $50 million company was hanging in the balance, and my greatest immediate threat was an impatient mother-in-law and a dress I didn't want. "Handle it," I hissed into the phone, my voice low and fierce, a tone I'd never used before. "Delay it. Use any proxy you have. I don't care what it costs. I cannot be drawn out into the open. Not yet." There was a beat of silence on the other end, and I heard a new note of respect in Albert's voice. "Understood. I'll manage it." I ended the call, leaning my forehead against the cool mirror. The woman staring back at me was pale, her eyes wide with a fear that was entirely new.
This was no longer a game of secrets and hurt feelings. This was a battle for control, and a predator had just caught the scent of blood in the water. "Eleanor!" Brenda's voice was a knife through the door. I took a deep, shuddering breath, composing my face into a mask of mild apology. I unlocked the door. "So sorry, Brenda. You wouldn't believe the trouble with the peonies." She looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You look pale. Are you feeling unwell?" "It's just the lighting in here," I said, forcing a smile. "Now, let's see this Valentino." The gown was beautiful, of course, a cascade of ivory silk that cost more than Charles's first car. As I stood there, letting the attendant zip me up, I felt a strange, grim resolve settle over me. Silas Thorne was a threat from the world I was born to lead. Brenda Ravenscroft was a threat from the world I had married into. Both saw me as an obstacle, an irrelevance, or a pawn.
The silence in the boardroom after the vote was more profound than any noise. Franklin Albright let out a long, shaky breath, the tension draining from his shoulders. My God, Eleanor, he was ready to carve us up and sell us for parts. You were magnificent. Arthur would be... he'd be... His voice cracked, and he simply shook his head, his eyes glistening. The adrenaline that had been coursing through me suddenly vanished, leaving me feeling hollow and trembling. I gripped the back of my grandfather's chair to steady myself. "He would be furious I waited this long, Franklin," I said, my own voice raw. "But we haven't won. We've bought a stay of execution. 6 months. That's all." Franklin nodded, his professional composure returning. 6 months to deliver a miracle. I'll have the full R&D files for the composite and AI projects sent to your hotel immediately. You'll need to get up to speed faster than anyone in the history of this company. As we left the building, the bright, indifferent sunlight felt jarring. The world outside hadn't changed, but mine had been irrevocably altered. My phone, which I had silenced for the meeting, now showed a screen filled with notifications. Missed calls from Charles, Brenda, and a string of text messages that grew increasingly unhinged. The last one from Charles read, "Where are you? My father is having a conniption. This is no longer a joke, Eleanor. Call me now." I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The news of my appearance at Vanderland had clearly reached them. The carefully constructed image of the modest, manageable daughter-in-law had publicly shattered. I didn't call him back. Instead, I went directly to the hotel where a stack of technical files and a secure laptop were waiting for me. I ordered coffee and dove in. The complex schematics and research papers, a welcome refuge from the emotional wreckage of my personal life. This was a language I understood, a problem I could solve. It was the world of people that had become incomprehensible. The knock on my hotel room door came a few hours later. I assumed it was room service. I was wrong. I opened the door to find Charles and Lawrence Ravenscroft standing in the hallway. Charles's face was a thundercloud of fury and humiliation. Lawrence looked like a man who had just discovered a cockroach in his caviar, disgusted and personally offended. "Eleanor," Lawrence said, his voice dripping with icy contempt as he brushed past me into the suite without an invitation. He looked around the elegant room, his gaze lingering on the open technical files spread across the desk. "So it's true. This is the little secret you've been keeping." Charles followed, slamming the door behind him. "A $50 million company?" he shouted. "You lied to me. For our entire marriage, you looked me in the eye and lied." I was following the terms of my grandfather's will, a 1-year period of non-disclosure. It was to protect the company from exactly this kind of reaction. Reaction. Lawrence spat the word. "You made fools of us. My son married you thinking you were a sensible girl from a respectable, modest family, and all the while you were sitting on a fortune, letting us believe we were
Subsidizing your life? The indignation was so profound, it was almost comical. That's what this is really about, isn't it? I said, looking from Lawrence's livid face to Charles's wounded one. Your pride, the fact that you weren't the wealthiest party in the arrangement, that your son didn't elevate me. He married far above his own financial station without even knowing it. Charles flinched as if I'd struck him. How can you be so cold? This is about trust. This is about our marriage. What marriage, Charles? I fired back, the dam finally breaking. The one where you called me your best investment? The one where your father dismissed my grandfather's life's work as a nice little business? The one where you told me my only role was to look beautiful and not speak? You didn't want a partner. You wanted a prop, and when I stopped playing my part, you slapped me for it. Lawrence's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the slap, but his sympathy was non-existent. A man can only be pushed so far, Eleanor. You have been deliberately deceitful and provocative. I am done having my life and my worth defined by the men in this room. The conversation is over. Get out. Charles stared at me, a stranger in his wife's skin. So that's it? After everything? After everything, I confirmed, my gaze steady. I have a company to run. I suggest you go home and figure out how to secure your position without my modest assets to prop you up. They left then, Lawrence with a final, searing glare of contempt, Charles with a bewildered look of a man who had lost something he never truly understood he had. As the door closed, I leaned against it, the confrontation leaving me drained. There was no triumph, only a weary, profound sadness. The bridge was burned, and the ashes were cold. The following weeks were a whirlwind. My life became a triangle between my hotel room, Franklin's office, and the Vanderlinde R&D labs. I met the engineers, the scientists, the dreamers my grandfather had cultivated. At first they were wary of the heiress, but when I started asking the right questions, when I could discuss tensile strength and machine learning algorithms with a foundational understanding, their skepticism turned to cautious enthusiasm. I was in my element. The ghost of my grandfather felt close here, in the smell of machine oil and the glow of computer screens running simulations. I was no longer just defending his legacy. I was beginning to build upon it.
A month after the board meeting, a package arrived at my hotel. It was from Charles's lawyer. The contents were a petition for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Tucked between the legal documents was a handwritten note from Charles. Eleanor, I'm doing this because you left me no choice. You chose that company over me. I hope it makes you happy. I suppose I never really knew you at all. I set the note aside, feeling a final, quiet click of a door closing in my heart. He was right. He never had. The work became my solace and my purpose. The advanced composite project, a material that was lighter than aluminum and stronger than steel, showed particular promise. We were overcoming the final production hurdles. The AI integration was trickier, but the lead programmer, a brilliant young woman named Anya, had a breakthrough that had the entire team excited. 6 weeks before the 6-month deadline, Franklin and I were reviewing the progress reports in his office. They're starting to believe, Eleanor, he said, a genuine smile on his face. The board can feel the shift. Even Thorne has been quiet. Too quiet. As if on cue, Franklin's assistant buzzed in. Mr. Albright, a Mr. Silas Thorne is here to see Miss Wiley. He says it's urgent. Franklin and I exchanged a glance. This was it. The other shoe was about to drop. Send him in, I said. Thorne entered, his demeanor as controlled as ever, but there was a new intensity in his eyes. He didn't bother with pleasantries. I've just come from a meeting with Lawrence Ravenscroft. He's making a play. I felt a chill. What kind of play?
He's using his connections, leaning on old debts. He's trying to assemble a coalition on the board to vote against your proposal when the 6 months are up. He doesn't care about the prototypes. He's telling them you're unstable, that your personal life is a scandal, that you're a liability. He's poisoning the well. Franklin cursed under his breath. We can fight it. The progress reports speak for themselves. Do they? Torn asked, his gaze fixed on me. To a nervous board member being told the CEO is a recently divorced woman who hid a fortune from her own husband, they'll get cold feet. They'll vote for stability, for the devil they know. He paused. Me. The room was silent. He was right. Lawrence was attacking the one thing I couldn't control with data and prototypes: perception. So, why are you telling me this? I asked, studying him. You could just let him do your dirty work. You'd get the company without a fight. Torn gave a thin, sharp smile. I'm a predator, Eleanor, as your late husband so aptly noted, but I prefer to hunt healthy, worthy prey. A company torn apart by a personal vendetta and handed to me on a platter, there's no sport in that. No victory. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. More importantly, I've been watching you. You're not just an heiress. You have a mind for this. Your plan, as speculative as it was the right one. Lawrence Ravenscroft is a relic. I'd rather see what you can build. I was stunned into silence. The corporate shark was offering me a lifeline. What are you suggesting? Franklin asked, voicing the question I couldn't form. I'm suggesting an alliance. Temporary. We present a united front to the board, my shares and your shares. We vote together to install you as the permanent CEO. We shut Lawrence down for good. You get to run your company. I get a front row seat to the most interesting corporate turnaround I've seen in a decade. It was a deal with the devil. But the devil, it seemed, was the only one being honest with me. I looked at Franklin, who gave a slow, cautious nod. Then I looked back at Silas Thorne, this enigmatic, dangerous man who saw the engine in me when my own husband had only seen the ornament. All right, Mr. Thorne. I extended my hand. He took it, his grip firm and sure. The war had just found its most unlikely and most powerful ally. The battle for the boardroom was back on, and this time, I wouldn't be fighting it alone. The alliance with Silas Thorne was a pact sealed not with a handshake, but with a shared, grim understanding of the battlefield. We had 6 weeks. Our strategy sessions were a study in contrasts. He operated in a world of leverage, pressure points, and financial intimidation. I operated in a world of engineering tolerances, innovation timelines, and team morale. Franklin acted as the translator between our two languages. We need to secure Jeffries, Thorne stated during one of our late-night calls, his voice crisp through the speakerphone. He's old guard, sentimental about Arthur, but terrified of risk. Lawrence is whispering in his ear that you're a loose cannon. Then we show him I'm not, I countered, staring at the Gantt chart for the composite material project. We fly him to the R&D lab. Let him see the prototype. Let him talk to Anya and her team. Let him feel the momentum. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Sentimental, Thorne said, the words sounding foreign in his mouth. But it might work. Leverage his nostalgia for your grandfather. I'll handle the others. Mitchell responds to numbers. I'll show him what a 2% market share in the composite sector would do to our valuation. It was a brutal, two-pronged assault. Thorne worked the back channels, applying financial logic and the subtle threat of his own influence. I worked the front lines, opening the doors of the company my grandfather built, showcasing its beating heart. I was no longer just the heiress. I was the steward. The personal toll, however, was relentless. The divorce proceedings were a cold, bureaucratic dissection of a failed marriage. Charles's lawyers argued for a significant settlement, claiming my deception had caused him emotional distress and professional humiliation. My lawyer, a sharp, unflappable woman named Isabella Rossi, dismantled their arguments with surgical precision. "Your client," she stated dryly during one deposition, "is seeking compensation for the emotional distress of discovering his wife was significantly more successful than he had assumed. The court is not in the business of rewarding wounded pride." The Ravencrofts, stripped of their preferred weapons of social pressure and condescension, were flailing. Brenda sent one final scathing letter, disinviting me from all future family functions in perpetuity. I read it once, then dropped it into the shredder. Their world was a gilded cage I had already escaped. The true test came 3 weeks before the board vote. The advanced composite team hit a critical failure. A batch of the material, which had tested perfectly in the lab, developed microfractures under a sustained load simulation. It was a disaster. The news sent a wave of panic through the project. Jeffries, who had been cautiously optimistic after his lab visit, called Franklin, his voice laced with doubt. "I told you it was too speculative, Franklin. This is exactly what Lawrence warned us about. She's in over her head." I was in the lab when the call came through, covered in the lab coat, staring at the failed component with Anya. The despair in the room was a physical presence. "This sets us back months," Anya murmured, her shoulders slumped. "We don't have months." I picked up the fractured piece of composite. It was cool and surprisingly light. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the gloom. "It doesn't set us back, it teaches us something." I looked at the team, their tired, discouraged faces. My grandfather's first successful gear didn't work on the first try, or the 10th. He said failure was the most expensive, most effective teacher you could ever have. So let's learn. What did it teach us? The question shifted the energy in the room. The focus moved from the failure itself to the data it provided. We worked for 48 hours straight, fueled by coffee and a desperate, shared purpose. I was there for all of it, not as a boss giving orders, but as a fellow problem solver, listening to the engineers, reviewing the data streams, making calls to material scientists my grandfather had known. It was Thorne who found me there on the second day, asleep at a desk, my head pillowed on a stack of schematics. I woke to find him standing over me, his expression unreadable. "Jeffries is having breakfast with Lawrence right now. The news of the failure has reached him." I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, the weight of the world crashing back down. "We're close to a solution. The bonding agent was the issue. We have a new formulation being tested as I speak." "It doesn't matter," Thorne interrupted, his voice low and urgent. "Perception is reality. If Jeffries flips, Mitchell will follow. We'll lose the vote." A cold resignation washed over me. After all this, it was going to end like this. Not with a bang, but with a micro-fracture. Thorne studied my face, the exhaustion, the defiance. He said, "Get up and get ready." "We're not waiting for the vote." "What are you talking about?" "We're calling an emergency board meeting. Today, right now." "That's insane. We don't have the prototype. We have nothing to show them but a failure." "We're not going to show them the prototype. We're going to show you." An hour later, I walked into the Vanderlyn boardroom for the second time. The atmosphere was electric with tension and surprise. Lawrence Ravenscroft was there, sitting next to a pale and uncomfortable-looking Jeffries. He shot me a look of pure, undiluted venom. "This is highly irregular, Thorne. You can't just call a meeting on a whim." "It's not a whim. It's a necessity. You've been circulating rumors about a failure in the composite project. You're right. There was one." A murmur went through the room. Lawrence looked smug. Jeffries looked ill. But for the last 48 hours, I swept my gaze across the board. That's what we've been doing. We haven't slept. We haven't given up. We found the flaw. We have a new formulation being tested as I speak. The setback isn't a sign of incompetence, it's a sign of a team that is pushing the boundaries of what's possible, a team that I am proud to lead. I was no longer arguing for a 6-month trial. I was asserting my leadership. Thorne stepped in. The question before you is no longer about prototypes or timelines. The question is about who you want at the helm when this company inevitably faces its next crisis. Do you want someone who runs to the press and whispers about failure? I glanced dismissively at Lawrence. Or do you want the person who is in the lab, covered in grease, leading the fight to fix it? He let the question hang in the air. I call for a vote of confidence, Thorne said, his voice ringing with authority. A vote to appoint Eleanor Wiley as the permanent Chief Executive Officer of Vanderlyn Industries, effective immediately. It was a breathtaking power play. He had forced the issue, turning our greatest weakness into a demonstration of our greatest strength, resilience. The vote was called. It was not unanimous this time, but it was decisive. One by one, the hands went up, Jeffries's among them. His vote, a quiet nod to the ghost of my grandfather. It was over. I had won. As the room emptied, Lawrence stormed out without a word. Thorne turned to me. The company is yours, CEO Wiley. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't calculation or ambition. It was respect. Thank you, Silas, for everything. He simply nodded. The game's not over. It's just beginning. And now, it's going to be a lot more interesting. He left me alone in the boardroom. I walked to the head of the table and finally, slowly, lowered myself into my grandfather's chair. The leather sighed under my weight, as if welcoming me home. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood of the armrests, the ghost of his hands beneath mine. There were no cheers, no triumphant music, just a profound, echoing silence and the staggering weight of the responsibility I had fought so hard to claim. The quiet wife was gone. The interim leader was gone. I was Eleanor Wiley, CEO. The inheritance was no longer a secret. It was a mission. And for the first time since I'd put on that silk wedding gown, every part of me was finally, completely telling the truth. The first 90 days of my tenure as CEO were a baptism by fire that stripped away any remaining sentimentality. The chair was mine, but the loyalty of the company was not a given. I was a 32-year-old woman who had appeared out of nowhere, the subject of corporate gossip and a scandalous, very public divorce. My credibility was paper thin. My days began before sunrise and ended long after the janitorial staff had left. I made a point of being the first person on the executive floor and the last to leave. I learned the names of the night security guards and the cafeteria workers. I didn't hide in the corner office. I invaded the engineering pits and the factory floors. I asked questions, and more importantly, I listened to the answers. Slowly, the suspicious glances turned into nods of acknowledgement, and then, gradually, into looks of respect. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday. The settlement was a fraction of what Charles had initially demanded. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, had seen right through his claims of distress. The Ravenscroft name held no sway in her courtroom. I walked out of the courthouse with a single piece of paper that legally severed me from that chapter of my life. There was no fanfare, only a quiet, profound sense of closure. Charles was now a ghost from a life that no longer fit. My focus narrowed to a laser point, Vanderland. The new bonding agent for the composite material worked. We were back on schedule. The AI integration project under Anya's brilliant direction was yielding results that even the most optimistic projections hadn't foreseen. The company was beginning to hum with a new energy, a sense of purpose that had been missing since my grandfather's passing. It was in the middle of this fragile, hopeful momentum that the past reached out with a venomous sting. It started as a low rumble in the business press,
anonymous sources questioning my qualifications, my stability, my bizarre journey from society wife to CEO. Then a full-blown article was published in a prominent financial magazine. The headline was a masterclass in character assassination. The heiress and the hostile takeover. Is Vanderlend being run by a scorned socialite? The article was a tapestry of half-truths and insinuations, clearly fed by Lawrence Ravenscroft. It painted me as a manipulative woman who had hidden a fortune to entrap a husband from a good family, and then, in a fit of pique, had orchestrated a hostile takeover of my own company. It quoted close family friends who described me as unstable and prone to melodrama. It mentioned the failed composite test, framing it as a catastrophic error in my judgment rather than a successful problem-solving exercise. The final blow was a grainy photo of me leaving the courthouse after the divorce, my face looking strained and tired, with a caption questioning my ability to lead a major corporation during a personal crisis. The effect was instantaneous. Our stock price dipped. I received a terse, concerned email from Jeffries. The board, which had just given me its vote of confidence, was getting nervous again. Franklin was apoplectic. "We'll sue for libel. This is defamation, pure and simple." I sat at my desk, the magazine open in front of me, my hands steady. The initial wave of white-hot anger had passed, leaving behind a cold, clear resolve. This wasn't just an attack on me, it was an attack on the company. Lawrence was trying to burn down Vanderlend simply to scorch the earth beneath my feet. Suing will take years, Franklin. It will keep the story in the headlines. It gives him exactly what he wants, a spectacle. "Then what do you propose we do?" he asked, his voice tight with frustration. "I propose we do what my grandfather would have done," I replied, closing the magazine. "We build something so impressive, so undeniably successful, that the gossip becomes irrelevant." But I knew that wasn't enough. Not this time. The quiet, dignified approach wouldn't work against a foe who fought with mud. I needed a different strategy. I needed to control the narrative. An hour later, I was in the studio of the city's most watched Sunday morning business talk show. I hadn't called a publicist or a PR firm. I had called the producer directly. "I want to come on," I said. Live. No pre-approved questions. It was a massive risk, but playing it safe had nearly cost me my company. Sitting in the stark brightness of the studio, a microphone clipped to my simple black dress, I felt a strange peace. The host, a seasoned journalist named Michael Cross, began with the expected softballs. I answered them with a focus on Vanderlind's future, our innovations, our dedicated team. Then he leaned in, his expression turning serious. "Ms. Wiley, let's address the elephant in the room. A major publication has published a story that raises serious questions about your character and your fitness to lead. They suggest your ascent to CEO was born not out of business acumen, but out of personal revenge. How do you respond?" I looked directly into the camera. This wasn't for Michael Cross. This was for every board member, every employee, every investor who was watching. "I'm not going to waste our time today by dissecting a hit piece fueled by the bitter whispers of a man whose son I divorced," I began, my voice even and firm. "The personal attacks are a distraction from what's really happening at Vanderlend. But since you've asked, I will say this. Yes, I kept my inheritance a secret. It was a condition of my grandfather's will, a man who built this company from a single tool and die shop. He wanted it protected from those who might see it only as a piggy bank or a status symbol. He wanted it led by someone who understood its soul. For the last year, I have been that silent leader. I learned this business from the ground up, just as he did. The scorned socialite narrative is a convenient fiction for those who can't comprehend a woman being both the heiress to a fortune and a capable, hands-on CEO." I paused, letting the words sink in. The article mentions a significant failure in a key project, a failure that they claim you tried to hide. I didn't flinch. Innovation is a path paved with failures. The true test of leadership isn't avoiding failure, it's how you respond to it. When that composite failed, I was in the lab with my team for 48 hours straight until we understood why and fixed it. We didn't hide it, we learned from it. That project is now back on track and it will revolutionize our industry. That's the story. Not my divorce, not the gossip. The story is the work. I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. My grandfather used to say that in business, you're either moving forward or you're falling behind. Vanderlyn spent too long falling behind, playing it safe, resting on past laurels. Those days are over. We are moving forward. And anyone who wants to focus on yesterday's news instead of tomorrow's technology, well, they're welcome to get left behind. The segment ended. By the time I got back to my office, my phone was ringing off the hook. The response was overwhelming. Emails flooded in from women in business, from engineers, from people who saw through the smear campaign. The stock price, which had dipped, began to rebound, stronger than before. The next board meeting was a quiet, almost subdued affair. The questions were about timelines and market strategy. The personal attacks were never mentioned again. That evening, as I left the office, I found a single, plain envelope on my desk. Inside was a note written on thick, expensive stationery. It contained only 2 sentences. A masterclass in turning poison to power. It seems I backed the right horse after all. It was unsigned, but I knew the handwriting. It was from Silas Thorne. I smiled. A small, private thing. The attack had failed. In fact, it had backfired spectacularly. By forcing me to publicly defend myself, Lawrence had given me the platform I needed to truly claim my authority. I was no longer Arthur Wiley's granddaughter or Charles Ravenscroft's ex-wife. I was Eleanor Wiley, the CEO. The narrative was mine now, and I would never let it go again. The foundation was laid. Now it was time to build the future.
5 years later, the hum of the Vanderlyn headquarters was a different sound. It was the sound of confident prosperity, of a company that had not just survived, but had redefined itself. The view from my office, earned through blood, sweat, and a very public fight, was of a city that now saw us as a leader, not a relic. The advanced composite, branded V-Core, was the industry standard in 3 sectors. Anya's AI integration system was in its 3rd generation, licensing fees pouring in from competitors who had once dismissed us. The company was worth triple what it had been, a vibrant, innovative engine. My grandfather's legacy wasn't just preserved, it was thriving. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. My assistant, a sharp young man named David, peered in. "Ms. Wiley, your 3 o'clock is here. Mr. Charles Ravenscroft?" The name landed not as a shock, but as an expected, if distant, echo. I had heard snippets about the Ravenscrofts over the years. Their fortunes had continued their slow, inexorable decline. Lawrence's old-world connections had proven useless in a new-world economy. Charles's directorship had been eliminated in a merger my own legal team had discreetly scrutinized to ensure no foul play was aimed at me. "Send him in, David." Charles looked older. The boyish charm had been sanded away by worry and, I suspected, regret. His suit was still expensive, but it hung on him slightly, lacking the arrogant certainty it once held. He stood awkwardly before my desk, his eyes taking in the panoramic view, the awards on the shelf, the simple, framed photograph of my grandfather and me that was the only personal touch in the room. "Eleanor," he began, his voice softer than I remembered. "Charles," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Please sit." He did, folding his hands in his lap, a picture of diminished pride. "This is quite an office." "It serves its purpose," I replied, my tone neutral. I would not make this easy for him. He didn't deserve my cruelty, but he hadn't earned my kindness either. He cleared his throat. I saw the feature on you in Forbes, Turnaround Titan. It was impressive."
Thank you." A long, heavy silence filled the space between us. He was struggling, searching for the words he'd likely rehearsed. "I'm here because, well, my father's company, the holding company, it's—" He couldn't bring himself to say it. "We're facing liquidation. The creditors, there's nothing left. My parents have had to sell the estate." I said nothing. I had known this day was coming. Franklin's network of financial informants was excellent. "I was wondering," he continued, his gaze fixed on his hands, "if there might be a place for me here, at Vanderline. I know I made mistakes, Eleanor. Terrible mistakes. I was a fool. I didn't see you. I didn't see any of it." He finally looked up and his eyes were pleading. "But I'm a hard worker. I could learn anything. An entry-level position. I need a chance." There was a time when the sight of him brought to his knees would have filled me with a vengeful fire. Now I felt only a profound, weary pity. The man who had once told me my only role was to look beautiful was now begging for a job from the woman he had slapped for wearing a piece of her inheritance. I leaned back in my chair, the leather sighing softly. I thought of my grandfather, not of his business acumen, but of his profound, unwavering decency. He believed in second chances, but he also believed in accountability. "Charles," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "there is no place for you here." The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a crushing defeat. "This company was built on integrity and innovation. It runs on trust. The trust I've built with my board, with my employees, was forged in a fire you and your family helped to light. Bringing you into this ecosystem after everything that happened would undermine that trust. It would be a betrayal of the people who stood by me." He nodded slowly, the truth of it settling on him like a weight. "But," I said, and he looked up, a flicker of desperate hope returning. I opened a drawer and took out my personal checkbook. I wrote a figure that was substantial, enough to give him a true fresh start, to pay off his most pressing debts, but not enough to restore the life he had lost. It was a sum that demanded humility. I slid the check across the desk. "This is not a severance. It is not alimony. It is a gift. From me, Eleanor, to you, Charles. Use it to build a new life, a real one based on who you are, not on the name you carry." He stared at the check, his hands trembling as he picked it up. The amount was both a salvation and an insult, a testament to how far the power dynamic between us had shifted. It was charity, and he knew it. He whispered, "Thank you," his voice thick with emotion. He stood, unable to look at me, and walked out of my office without another word. I watched him go, feeling the final ghost of my old life dissipate into the air. There was no triumph, only closure. Later that evening, I stood before my grandfather's grave, a simple habit I'd kept all these years. The polished granite was warm from the setting sun. I traced the letters of his name. "I saw Charles today," I said softly to the quiet air. I gave him a check. I hope that was the right thing to do. I think it was the human thing to do. The wind rustled the leaves of a nearby oak, a gentle, whispering sound. "I built it, Grandpa," I said, a smile finally touching my lips. "Just like you taught me. Not with the money, but with the lessons. I built it back stronger." I thought of the secret I had carried, the weight of it almost breaking me. I thought of the fight, the public humiliation, the lonely nights in a hotel room. I thought of the thrill of a breakthrough in the lab, the respect in Anya's eyes, and the steady, challenging presence of Silas Thorne, who had become a trusted, if always sharp-edged advisor. The inheritance wasn't the company. The inheritance was the strength to claim it. The secret wasn't a lie I told my husband, it was a truth
I had to discover about myself. I placed a single smooth stone, a tradition he loved, on top of the headstone. "Thank you," I whispered. Then I turned and walked away, the heels of my boots clicking a confident rhythm on the path. The past was finally completely at peace, and the future, my future, stretched out before me, bright and boundless, a creation entirely my own. The story of the quiet wife and the secret fortune was over. My story, the one I was writing every single day, had just begun.